Hello and welcome to On the Ledge podcast. Surprise! Yes, I've got another one of my occasional episodes coming out into your ears today. I'm Jane Perrone, your host. If you want to hear me more regularly than these very, very occasional On the Ledge updates, then do check out the Deep Dive podcast for Houseplant Gardening, which is the other podcast that I make every week. It comes out on a Thursday. It's not exclusively about indoor gardening, although that does come up in some episodes, but it's where I interview people who are fellow scribehound gardening writers covering all aspects of the garden world. I'll put a link in the show notes if you want to check it out, or just search for Deep Dive and my name. And on to this week's show. I am delighted that I got the chance to interview Avery Rowe again. You may remember Avery from my episode about the wonderful Tradescantia family, but Avery has many strings to their bow, and one of these other strings is a penchant for brilliant academic research, the kind of stuff that answers questions that we really need answers to. And in this case, it's the tricky old question of drainage in pots. Back in the day, we were always told that adding a layer of rocks to the bottom of a pot or gravel would aid with drainage. And then fashions changed, thoughts changed, and suddenly everyone was decrying this practice as not working. So Avery, fascinated by this topic as somebody who grows a lot of potted plants, wanted to find out some scientific grounding for this particular question. And being Avery and being very thorough, rather than just maybe reading a few books, Avery decided to research and write a scientific paper for an academic journal. You can go and read Avery's paper for yourself. It's been published in a journal called PLOS. This is a non-profit publisher of open access journals in the sort of sciencey field. And PLOS stands for Public Library of Science. So this was a really excellent place to publish this research. Why? Well, because most or many academic journals you can't get access to unless you are in the hallowed halls of academia. But this one is out there and available to everyone at no cost. So in the show notes, you'll find a link to Avery's article if you want to go and look at the source material for this interview. In this chat, Avery and I talk about the question itself. Does a drainage layer help to move water through a pot, and the many complexities related to that? Plus, we also talk about the challenges of publishing and doing academic research, and the response that Avery got from other academics. While I'm here, also a very quick reminder that my Patreon is still available. If you sign up, you have to sign up in the awareness that I'm not putting anything much new on there, although this episode will be going up as an ad-free version. But it's a way that you can still access all the content, the exclusive content that's there. So do check that out. There's a link in the show notes. Right, on with my interview with Avery. Enjoy. Avery, thank you so much for joining me on the Ledge podcast.
Thanks for having me.
I'm very excited about what you've done. This is not something I've come across before, but I'm very excited about it. And I have to say, I'm just going to throw out a little bit of praise here. I so admire everything you do because it's all done just absolutely chef's kiss, brilliantly executed and researched. And this is no different. You've written an academic paper on a topic that I think we all need to know the outcome of. So can you tell me a little bit about your research question and how the paper came about?
Yeah, so my research paper is about the effect of drainage layers on the water retention in soil in plant pots. So it's been like a kind of an open and hotly debated question in gardening circles for a long time about whether adding a layer of rocks or gravel at the bottom of a plant pot is good for drainage, or maybe it's bad for drainage, or it does nothing. And people have been like arguing about it for decades. And in all of that time, no one has ever actually just tested it in a formal scientific way. So that's what I did, essentially.
Why has that not happened before now? That's my first question. Why didn't somebody just sit down and go, let's come up with an experiment?
Honestly, I have the same question. I don't know the answer. Like the best explanation I can think of is that like the people who the answer matters to are mostly not scientists. They're gardeners and like practical horticulture people who are not doing research. And then the people who would be able to do the research, like soil scientists and academics, they don't need the answer to this question because it's such a kind of small, specific niche thing that it doesn't matter to them enough to kind of do the work.
I think that's probably true of so many issues that we face in the indoor gardening world. And in terms also of the plants that we love, and we want to know the answer to why they are the way they are, but actually the research just hasn't been done because they're not tobacco and they're not wheat and they're not,
exactly.
Some very productive crop that there's a money incentive.
Yeah, it's similar with doing research on Tradescantias because they're only ornamentals, so they're just they're economically insignificant, so no one has bothered to study them.
Exactly. And now let's just talk for those of our listeners, and including me, who are not academics. You're not an academic. You're not working in a university. So how did you come about? How were you able to actually work out the process of getting a scientific paper published?
Yeah, I just kind of went for it. Like, I don't know, I don't really have an answer for that. I just did a lot of reading and Googling and I'm kind of stubborn in a determined way. So I was just like, well, someone needs to do this research. Clearly no one else is going to do it. So I'm going to have to do it myself, even though I don't have a university affiliation. I'm just going to have to find out how to do it. And then I kind of did.
Well, that is absolutely brilliant. And you have also something that, we were talking about before this interview, some journals you have to pay an enormous amount to access, but the one you've published in, which is called PLOS, which is probably short for something, I can't remember what. What's it short for?
Public Library of Science.
Okay, so it's an open access journal. So I'll put the link in the show notes so anyone can go and read your research, which is so important, right?
Yeah. And I specifically wanted to publish in an open access journal so that anyone will be able to read it without having like a journal subscription, because this topic of research is, like I said, more relevant to non-academics than it is to other scientists.
So how did you actually design this experiment? This is the meat and drink here. Like, this is a question that's troubled people for generations. And I know that myself, I've made statements in the past, probably on both sides of this argument, without really having any scientific background to back it up. So how did you tackle the question of this particular question?
So there's kind of two sides to doing a research paper. One is the practical experimental side, which in this case was actually pretty simple because I got a bunch of pots, like bigger versions of this, and put different combinations of drainage layers and potting mixes in them, and then poured water in them and weighed them to see how much water was retained before and after, and kind of compared those numbers. So it was like it's very kind of simple, the actual procedure, although doing it in like a controlled, precise way so that the results were kind of valid. And then the other side of a research paper is the sort of literature review, which is like reading existing research and seeing what other results suggest might happen in this case and why they suggest that might happen. And interestingly, most of the research that I reviewed in that process suggested that what I found would be the case, but it's just that it had never been like tested in this particular context before.
So this is the key moment. What were your findings? What can we authoritatively say? And I guess also we should say this is one research paper. Presumably you now are hoping that this would be replicated by other researchers.
Definitely, yeah. Because this is the very first time it's ever been tested. So like you can't draw a sweeping global conclusion from one experiment. It's like this is a start and now it needs to be built upon and validated and expanded and all of that. But yeah, what the results that I found were that basically adding a drainage layer of coarse material reduces the amount of water that is retained in the soil above it.
I mean, it's so simple.
Yeah.
What kinds of materials were you working with here? What did you actually use for your testing? Did you vary the different substrates?
Yeah, so I used 3 different potting mixes. The coarsest one was a mixture of coir, bark and perlite. And then a kind of intermediate one was a mixture of coir and vermiculite. And then the sort of densest one was a loam-based John Innes garden potting compost. So like very heavy. And then I used 6 different, hang on, let me just count. 4 different drainage substrates.
Okay.
Ranging from coarse sand, like 1 to 2 millimeters, up to gravel of up to 8 millimeters in size. So then I did like different combinations of each potting mix with each substrate, did 10 replications of each to make sure that any like random errors wouldn't have an impact on the results, and then compared. And overall I found that generally the coarse sand, which is the finest drainage layer substrate, had the most impact on reducing water retention in general.
So does this mean that we should all start putting a layer of sand at the bottom of our pots?
I mean,
has it changed your practice?
It hasn't, and I'm not gonna do anything different based on this, because I find it easier in practice to just use a soil that retains the amount of water that I want on its own and save the hassle of adding a drainage layer. But basically, it's like what we've learned from this is that a drainage layer is a potential tool which can be used to reduce the water retention of a given soil even in a given container if other conditions remain the same. So like if you have a particular soil that you really want to use for some reason, or you have a plant that really needs to dry out thoroughly, or for some reason you've only got a really big pot that's much bigger than necessary, then now we know that adding a drainage layer would be a potential option to improve that.
The traditional thing has always been for people to put old broken up terracotta pots in the bottom, what we would call crocks, and I still see people recommending this. I mean, what would you, I mean, obviously your research didn't use that type of drainage layer, but I mean, is there still an argument for doing that? I mean, I often wonder whether it's just a way of doing something with waste material rather than any practical use.
Yeah, I think that, like, although people talk about drainage layers as a way to improve drainage or not to improve drainage or whatever, but like I think there's definitely other reasons why people do it. Like if you have a pot with one really big hole in the middle, then putting some stuff over it is a way to stop the soil from just literally washing out of the bottom, that's kind of a separate issue, and obviously it does still serve that function. And also like taking up extra space if the pot is too big, or just having, like you said, having something to do with the bits of broken pot that would otherwise go to waste. So it's like my research is not about those things. They still are whatever they are. But the research kind of shows that if you do that, it probably would have some impact on the amount of water retained in the pot. Although, like you said, I also didn't test that specific situation.
Got you. Yeah. I mean, this is the thing, isn't it? Scientific research is like a sort of a tower built on all these different blocks of research that have to take place in different places and contexts. And yours is a brilliant block, but it really is just the first, I guess. Have you had much response and interest from other researchers on this?
I have had some response. It's been quite interesting. So, like, because it's been quite a polarizing debate and also has been untested. So there's been a lot of people with very strong convictions on both sides and without any evidence for it. So when I shared my results, there's like half of people are vindicated that their prediction was correct, and then the other half of people are really upset that their prediction was proven wrong, basically. And like I've had some interactions with a few researchers who have kind of who particularly like popularized the idea that drainage layers are bad and they don't work, and who are now very, very upset by my claims and are taking reacting in a kind of an unexpected way, or at least a way that I find unexpected from a scientist, in that rather than, like, if a scientist thinks my results are wrong, or if they think I lied about it, or just that my method is so bad that it's totally invalid, then the established protocol for that in science is to do more science, like prove me wrong. And if that happens, if the result of my study is there are 10 replication studies and they all prove me wrong and agree with each other, like, that would be a success for science. I would be happy about that, you know, because it would mean like we've learned something. But some of the researchers that I've been interacting with, rather than taking the scientific approach of wanting to prove me wrong or test the study, have just done nothing except try to criticize the research and discredit me based on sort of arbitrary things or misreading the study. It's all been quite strange. I think people kind of reacting in an unexpectedly emotional way in some cases.
And I think we should point out that these journals include, I'm sure PLOS is the same, they don't just say, oh yeah, that sounds interesting, we'll take it. You are actually peer reviewed, right? Yeah.
It's like a months long process. When you submit a scientific paper, they like, first the editors look at it to decide whether it's just at all relevant for the journal that you're submitting it to, and then they send it out to other scientists who are specialists in the topic but were not involved in the research, and they're asked to give what's called a peer review, and they read the research and then give their feedback on whether it's good and whether there are flaws in it and what improvements could be made to the paper to make it worth publishing. And like, in that process, for me, I got lots of good, very cutting feedback about changes that needed to be made to the paper, and I made them. And it's like, it takes a lot of work to get it to a standard that was considered worthy of publication. And then once that process is done, then it's like it's considered sort of valid, like to be added to the scientific canon of literature.
I suppose this is one of the problems, that scientists are also human beings who don't necessarily react in a logical way.
Exactly, yeah.
And with gardening, you know, what I always find fascinating about gardening is it's such an intersection of science, but also sociology, art, culture, history, folklore. And I suppose a lot of that comes into play when people are reacting to something that they find unpalatable in some way.
Yeah, or unexpected. Yeah.
Unexpected, yeah, exactly. So how have you handled that? Has it been a difficult thing to feel like you're maybe being personally attacked over it?
Yeah, it's been strange. It was like, initially it was difficult. It's sort of, I mean, it doesn't feel nice to be attacked, you know, and sort of frustrating, I think, is the main thing, because I'm kind of trying to interact with fellow scientists, trying to have a scientific discussion, and what they're actually doing was not scientific at all. And they would make a point and I would respond, and then instead of acknowledging that, they would just kind of dodge to something else. And it's like, it's clear that they're only arguing to win rather than to try and learn something or gain something. Like, I feel like in a scientific argument, you're both on the same side, which should going towards the shared goal of like finding out what is true and correct. But in these interactions, that's not what it felt like. It definitely felt like they just wanted to win, basically, and for me to lose. So yeah, frustrating, I think, is the main thing. But I've kind of, now that it's sort of fizzled out, I guess, I don't know, they ran out of energy or ran out of things that they could make up to say about me. I just sort of, I'm looking back on it and it's kind of a little bit entertaining, sort of, because like, what, it's just strange to think of scientists with far more experience in academia than me being so kind of childish. It's just weird.
I can see what you're saying. It must be very frustrating. Do you think part of it was based on a prejudice against you because you weren't they considered you to be outside the scientific community as a non-university lecturer or researcher or whatever?
Yeah, I'm sure there is an aspect of that. Like, as an independent researcher, and also it's like it's the first time I've ever published, so I'm new, untested, I suppose. So all of those are kind of reasons why people might be sort of prejudiced against my work. Although the the point of the process of scientific publishing and peer review should be that those factors, that those things aren't a factor in analysing whether research is good or not. But in practice, my name is on the paper. People can Google me and find out who I am. So they're going to be able to use that to make judgments if they want to.
So now we know that the drainage layer is, well, so far from your research, with all the caveats we've already given, is something that we need to look at. Where are you going next with this? Are you kind of letting that lie and letting somebody else take up the mantle? Or are you going to do more research in this area?
I guess I'm undecided so far. I really hope that someone else does some research on it. Not least because the position of the science will be strengthened if more people than me are involved in doing the work. But also, I am kind of thinking about what follow-up study I could do next if I wanted to do one, and I'm kind of vaguely making plans, but it would be a more involved work, so it would take a lot of time and effort, and I'm still kind of debating whether that's feasible at the moment. Maybe one day, but yeah.
I guess what I should actually ask you though is, so what is actually happening inside the pot with the water? What is the drainage layer actually doing, do you think, from what I haven't really asked that question, but that's kind of important, isn't it? How is it actually, what is that drainage layer doing to the water that's happening inside the pot?
Okay, so when you pour water through soil, gravity is pulling the water down into the soil, but soil also exerts a force called capillary action, which is where an absorbent material pulls water to sort of spread out throughout it. So if you have a container of soil and you pour water through with a drainage hole in the bottom, gravity is trying to pull the water out of the drainage hole, and at the same time, capillary action is trying to pull the water up to spread throughout and stay in the soil. The force of gravity obviously doesn't change. The force of the capillary forces is dependent on the interface between the soil and whatever it's in contact with. So in a regular pot, where you just have soil is at the bottom of the container and then there's air underneath it, the interface between soil and air has a very strong capillary barrier effect. So that means that the capillary force that's working to keep the water inside the soil is very strong. So it counteracts a lot of the effect of gravity, and the result is that you have quite a significant pool of water at the bottom of the pot that doesn't drain out of the hole, even though gravity wants it to. That pool is called the perch water table. But when you add a drainage layer, you, instead of having an interface between soil straight to air, you have an interface from soil to gravel, and the strength of the capillary barrier effect is proportional to the contrast in particle sizes between the two materials. So because gravel has a particle size that's fairly similar to soil, there's less of a capillary barrier effect. So it's easier for the water to flow from soil into gravel than it is for the water to flow from soil straight into air. Because air effectively has an infinite particle size because there are no particles. So anything other than air has a smaller particle size, and therefore it's closer to being the same particle size as the soil, and therefore there's less of a barrier effect. So in a sense, when you add a drainage layer between the soil and the air, it's kind of like previously, to go from the soil to the air, the water has to go up one really big step. But if you add a drainage layer, it's like dividing that into two middle-sized steps, so it's easier for the water to get out.
I've got you. That makes a lot of sense. As you say, it's really good to have that laid out so you can really understand what's going on. Was that the result that you were expecting to get? Did you have an I mean, obviously, specific. I guess your research question was kind of different, but what was your kind of instinct and gut instinct about what the answer was going to be before you started?
Yeah, that is the result that I expected, but I wasn't sure because, like I said, it had never been tested before. But when I was researching existing literature before I did my study, I found a lot of research that kind of suggested that would be the case. So there are existing studies that have mathematically shown that the strength of the capillary barrier is proportional to the contrast in particle sizes, and have shown that the contrast between any medium and air will be greater than the contrast between one medium and another. So that would suggest that it's easier for water to go into gravel than it is to go into air. And then there's a lot of research on soils in the ground, which, interestingly, this is the area of research that a lot of people have used to suggest that drainage layers don't work. Because if you have continuous soil going all the way down to, bedrock, if you add a layer of gravel in the middle of that soil, then that gravel will interrupt the flow of water. Because continuous soil, water can just go through with no problems. But if you add a layer of something else, then the capillary barrier is introduced and the water stops and sits on top of it. So that's the logic that people have used to say, well, if you add gravel to a plant pot, then it's going to have the same effect. It's going to stop the water. But the difference is that the difference between soil to more soil and soil to gravel is like the opposite of the difference between soil to air and soil to gravel. So adding gravel in the middle of soil is a barrier, but adding gravel in between soil and air is less of a barrier.
This is why we need the research, isn't it? To actually prove what's going on. It's so useful. Well, I mean, I would you sort of recommend this course for anyone who's got a sciencey bent and wants to answer a question they've got about indoor gardening? Is there, I mean, it sounds like it's been a bit of a rocky road in terms of the response, but I mean, we kind of want more people to be doing this stuff, don't we? Because this is how we answer questions.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the response, the response has not made me regret doing it at all. And if I'd known in advance what the response would be, although I did kind of suspect that it might be like this, it wouldn't have stopped me. But the main thing, I mean, in principle, definitely, I think more people should do this, and I strongly encourage that. And I do think that it's difficult. So if people want to do things like this, they need to kind of be aware of what will be required. And the main thing is that basically doing good research is difficult if you don't have a lab. Just on a practical sense. There are a lot of things that ideally I would have done in my study that I couldn't do because I simply don't have a soil science lab at my disposal. And then the second thing is that writing and publishing a good research paper is difficult if you don't have experience in research. And most people get that experience initially by studying for a PhD. And if you haven't done that, then it's going to require basically a lot of reading mostly and studying. You need to be able to understand the state of existing research, understand how a research paper should be structured, what should be included, how it should be laid out, and then understand how to go through the peer review process and how to respond and all of that kind of stuff, which is it can be learned without an academic background, because I did do that, but it is difficult.
Well, I mean, I know you can do PhD by publication, so maybe that's your route to becoming Dr. Avery Rowe, that you go for the down that route. I always think that it would be just wonderful just to have a doctor in front of your name, just so when somebody sort of says, is it Miss and Miss, you can just go doctor, and then it's just so nice. But that's not a reason to do a PhD, I should emphasize.
It was quite funny in the process of submitting the publication, because all of the online systems where you're submitting to a journal, they all assume you're a doctor. Right. So I was getting all of these emails addressed to Dr. Avery Rowe. At no point did I ever tell anyone I was a doctor, but they'll call me doctor anyway. So I guess you don't even need a PhD.
There you go. Well, I mean, it's fascinating to hear about this, and I'm so glad that you've done the hard yards on this. But what we also know you from the interview that you did for On the Ledge about Tradescantias. You're obviously, that's still going, and you're still doing your wonderful research in that area and selling plants and so on. So anything we need to know about, any updates from the world of Tradescantias that we need to know about?
Yeah, good question. I don't think there's any hugely groundbreaking updates. The latest stuff that's been going on is I've been trying to track down a few old cultivars that seem to have kind of disappeared from cultivation. And I've been trying to kind of dig around and see if they might secretly be in a botanic garden somewhere or a closed down greenhouse or something. But I haven't had much success with the ones that I've been searching for so far. So that's kind of a bit of a disappointing news. And then another thing that I'm working on at the moment is there's a group of a group of cultivars called the Continental Group, which they look like these pink and white stripy ones mostly.
Oh, yeah, got you.
And they're a group of sort of mystery hybrids of unknown origin, and there are lots of them, and they're all very similar, and they all have very confusing names, sometimes reused, sometimes no name at all, sometimes just a vague description like the pink one or the white one. So at the moment, I'm in the process of sort of teasing out their differences to try and define exactly which ones are unique cultivars and which ones are the same. And then I'll be establishing like formal names for them. So some of them are going to keep the names that have been used informally so far, but some of them, their existing names are not really names at all. So I'm going to do some surveys among the Tradescantia nerd community for people to suggest what they think a good name should be for a kind of long-term stability for these plants. But there's a little bit of controversy around it because some people don't like changing names, even if the existing name has never been formalized and also is really unhelpful or confusing or duplicated or ambiguous. But people get kind of set on the things that they're used to. So I think there's going to be a little bit of negotiating with people to find the best solution to all of that.
We're back to the sort of, as you say, the set people being set in their ways about things, aren't we? It's the same issue. But well, it sounds like as ever you're doing wonderful work, Avery. So good luck with that. And we will keep. I'm certainly following with interest, and everything you do is just excellent. So I'll put lots of links in the show notes for people to go and check all of your work out, and including the paper in PLOS. So thank you very much for joining me today, and good luck with your next step in your research.
Thanks.
Thanks so much to Avery for joining me today. What a fantastic insight into the world of drainage layers. And let me know if that's changed your perspective on how you're doing things. Interesting one. Well, as I say, I'd love to say I'll be back next week, but I won't be back next week. So if you need to hear my voice, then do go and check out the Deep Dive podcast. And you can also find me on Instagram as j.l.perrone. And I drop occasional life updates there. But that's all for the minute. Do hope that you are. Now, I'll let you go off and check all of your drainage holes in your pots, because I know that's exactly what you need to do after listening to this episode. Bye.